The two men in catering uniforms didn't belong, and Rachel Doyle knew at the instant they slipped through the electrical room door instead of the kitchen. She'd been clearing plates near the head table at the Marriott Grand's annual charity gala, half listening to the low murmur of 500 guests, when her eyes caught the two men crossing the ballroom's edge. She'd worked this exact ballroom for 2 years. She knew every face on the catering crew, every uniform's proper fit, every service door's actual purpose. And these two men, moving with careful, deliberate purpose toward the electrical room instead of the kitchen, matched none of it. Rachel didn't wait to be certain. She set down her tray and moved. She ducked into the narrow service hallway that ran behind the ballroom's east wall, found the main breaker panel exactly where 2 years of memorizing this building's bones told her it would be, and killed the power. The ballroom plunged into total darkness. Screams erupted immediately, confused and scattered. 500 guests suddenly blind in a crowded room, and a half-second later, gunfire tore through the space where the head table had been standing, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness in brief, violent strobes. Rachel pressed herself flat against the hallway wall, heart slamming, adrenaline roaring loud enough to drown out even the screaming. She'd had no proof. No certainty. Just a wrongness she'd felt in her gut the instant those two men crossed toward a door they had no business opening. She'd been right. Security flooded the ballroom moments later, flashlight beams cutting through smoke and panic, shouting orders nobody could follow in the chaos. Rachel grabbed her own small flashlight from her apron, standard service equipment kept charged out of habit, and did the only thing that made sense. She started guiding panicked guests toward the nearest exits, her voice steady even as her hands shook, cutting through the darkness with calm, practiced authority. "This way," she called, sweeping her light across confused, terrified faces. "Exit straight ahead. Keep moving, keep low." It took 11 minutes for security to fully clear the ballroom and restore power. When the lights finally came back on, Rachel found herself standing near the head table's wreckage, staring at a composed, dangerous-looking man in a dark suit who was staring right back at her with an intensity that cut through even the lingering chaos around them. "You cut the power," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," Rachel said, breathless, adrenaline still roaring through her. "You saved my life," the man said. "I've never spoken to you before tonight." Security closed ranks around him immediately, urgent and protective, and Rachel understood with sudden, cold clarity exactly how much this man mattered to the people now flooding the ballroom. "Who are you?" she asked. "Lorenzo Santoro," he said, still watching her with an unreadable intensity. "And I need to know exactly how you knew those men didn't belong here, because my entire security team missed it completely." Rachel opened her mouth to explain and found the words harder to form than the instinct itself had been. "I notice details for a living," she said finally. "Those two didn't match." Behind them, forensics teams were already photographing shell casings scattered across the ballroom floor where Lorenzo Santoro had been standing seconds before the lights went out. Rachel Doyle was 30 years old, and the 2 years she'd spent working banquet events at the Marriott Grand in downtown Philadelphia represented a hard-won stability she'd built slowly, deliberately, after a decade of far less certain work. She lived in a modest apartment in South Philadelphia, close enough to visit her father every week, a man in his early 70s, living alone since Rachel's mother passed 6 years earlier, his early-stage memory decline making those weekly visits less a routine and more a promise Rachel had made herself she would never break, regardless of what else her schedule demanded. Her financial pressure was constant and specific, covering the gap between her father's modest pension and the actual cost of the home aide who checked in on him 3 days a week, an expense Rachel absorbed quietly rather than let her father feel like a burden to anyone. Her personal goal, held close and rarely discussed with coworkers, was to eventually save enough to move her father into an assisted living facility with genuine memory care, rather than the stretched, imperfect patchwork of part-time help she currently managed. That goal felt most months perpetually out of reach. Her emotional wound ran specific and deep. She'd watched her mother's final illness get missed by doctors who dismissed her early symptoms for months, a slow, agonizing failure of attention that had cost her mother precious time she never got back. Rachel had promised herself, in the aftermath of that grief, that she would never again dismiss a detail that felt wrong just because it lacked official confirmation, that hesitating to trust what you noticed, waiting for someone else's permission to act, could cost more than anyone warned you it might. Her moral boundary was simple and unbending. When something felt wrong, she acted regardless of whether she could fully explain why, regardless of the social awkwardness or professional risk of being the person who caused a scene over an unprovable instinct. Her practical skill, honed over a decade of service industry work across dozens of different venues, was an almost photographic memory for physical spaces. The exact layout of every service corridor, every breaker panel, every staff-only door in any building she'd worked more than a handful of shifts in. It wasn't a skill anyone had ever asked about or valued highly. It was simply how her mind organized the world. The recurring object she carried on every shift, a habit from her very first serving job at 17, was a small notepad tucked into her apron, not for orders which she'd long since learned to memorize, but for jotting down small operational details other staff tended to forget. Which vendor was running late, which guest had a specific allergy, which service door stuck in humid weather. Details nobody else bothered tracking, that occasionally quietly made the difference between a smooth shift and chaos. 2 weeks before the gala, Rachel had stayed 40 minutes past the end of her shift, unpaid, walking an elderly, disoriented gala guest back to hotel security after the woman became separated from her family in a crowded lobby, patiently keeping the frightened woman calm until her relatives were located. Nobody had asked Rachel to do that. She'd done it because leaving someone confused and frightened, alone in an unfamiliar space, felt like exactly the kind of failure of attention that had cost her mother so much. That same instinct, trained, practiced, entirely involuntary by now, was exactly what sent her moving toward an electrical room the second two unfamiliar men crossed a door they had no business opening. Standing in the wrecked ballroom afterward, adrenaline draining into exhausted shock, Rachel understood she'd just made a decision that had saved a room full of strangers' lives, and connected her, irreversibly, to a man whose composed authority radiated danger even now, hours after the gunfire had stopped. "I need you to come with hotel security for questioning," Lorenzo said, his own composure visibly reasserting itself despite the chaos still swirling around them. "And after that, I need to understand exactly what you saw in detail. Whoever planned this knows now that you're the reason it failed." Rachel looked past him at the ballroom's wreckage. The same ballroom she'd worked dozens of events in, now marked permanently by violence she'd narrowly prevented from being far worse, and felt the careful, ordinary shape of her life beginning to crack. The hotel's private security office felt too small for the tension inside it, Rachel sitting stiffly across from Lorenzo Santoro while his security team reviewed footage on a bank of monitors along the wall. "Walk me through it again," Lorenzo said. "Every detail. Don't leave anything out because it seems unimportant." "I told the officers everything already." "Tell me," Lorenzo said, and something in his tone, not quite a command but close, made Rachel understand this wasn't really a request. She recounted it again, more carefully this time. "I've worked this ballroom for 2 years. I know the catering crew's usual roster, know how the uniforms are supposed to fit, know which doors lead where. Those 2 men were dressed correctly, but everything else was wrong. The way they moved, too deliberate, like they were performing familiarity instead of actually having it. And they went toward the electrical room, which no catering staff has any reason to enter during service. That's a remarkably specific read for something happening across a crowded ballroom in a matter of seconds." "I've spent a decade reading rooms for a living," Rachel said, an edge of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "It's not magic. It's just paying attention to details most people don't bother noticing." Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Not quite surprise, but a careful, deliberate recalibration, the look of a powerful man reassessing someone he'd initially underestimated. "My security team has decades of combined training," he said. "None of them caught what you caught in far less time than you had." "Maybe your security team's watching for the wrong things," Rachel said, then immediately regretted the bluntness, until Lorenzo's expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of respect. "That's possible," he said. "I intend to find out." Rachel studied him properly for the first time since the chaos had settled. Composed, dangerous, carrying an authority that filled the small security office without him raising his voice once. "Who are you exactly?" she asked. "People don't get gunfire aimed at them over a routine business dinner." "My name is Lorenzo Santoro," he said. "My family has hotel and hospitality holdings across this city. Also, other interests, older ones connected to the name if you know Philadelphia's history well enough to recognize it." Rachel's stomach tightened. She did recognize it vaguely, the way most longtime service workers eventually absorbed which families carried weight beyond ordinary wealth. Mafia, she said flatly. That's the word people use, Lorenzo said, not denying it. Every instinct told Rachel to end this conversation, give her statement and go home to check on her father. But something about his directness, offered without excuse, without softening what it meant, kept her rooted in her chair. Someone tried to kill you tonight, she said slowly. And you think I might have seen something that could identify who? I think, Lorenzo said, that whoever planned this is going to realize very quickly that a waitress spotted their people before my own trained security did. That makes you considerably more dangerous to them than you probably feel right now. That's not my problem to carry, Rachel said, though her voice carried less conviction than she wanted. It became your problem the moment you cut that breaker, Lorenzo said, not unkindly. I'd rather you understand the danger clearly than discover it unprepared. Rachel absorbed that, weighing real fear against her fierce, instinctive resistance to being pulled into someone else's danger. What exactly are you asking? For now, a formal statement and permission to keep you informed as the investigation develops, Lorenzo said. You have sharp instincts and a memory for detail my own people clearly lack. I'd be foolish not to want your perspective as we figure out who did this. I have a father who needs me, Rachel said. A life I can't just abandon. I'm not asking you to abandon anything, Lorenzo said. I'm asking for your help and offering protection in return, for exactly as long as the danger is real. Rachel considered it, exhausted and unsettled by how quickly her ordinary evening had transformed into something far larger. I'll give my statement, she said finally. Beyond that we'll see. Fair enough, Lorenzo said, something like genuine relief moving behind his controlled composure. Their conversation was interrupted by one of his men, appearing in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression grim. Boss, he said. Building management just flagged something. Miss Doyle's apartment building had a break-in reported 20 minutes ago. Her unit specifically. Rachel's blood went cold. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, something dangerous moving behind his controlled expression. That's not a coincidence, he said quietly. That's confirmation. The break-in at Rachel's apartment. Nothing stolen, drawers left deliberately ajar, a message unmistakable in its intent, settled the question of whether she was involved before Rachel had fully decided how she felt about being involved at all. Lorenzo's attention over the following days became impossible to ignore. He requested her presence at every subsequent security briefing, his security detail treating her observations with a seriousness that unsettled her nearly as much as the break-in itself. You don't need me at every meeting, Rachel told him after the third briefing in as many days. I gave my statement. I don't have much else to add. You noticed 2 threats my entire team missed, Lorenzo said. I'd be a fool to stop asking what else you catch. The external consequence of his growing reliance on her arrived within the week. Lorenzo's cousin Angela, who managed the family's legitimate hotel operations, cornered him in his office with visible alarm. People are asking why a waitress is sitting in on classified security reviews, Angela said. It's making certain people nervous, Lorenzo. If whoever ordered that hit realizes how much weight you're putting on her observations, that makes her a considerably bigger target than she already is. I'm aware of the risk. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting this become personal faster than the situation warrants. The investigation moved forward regardless, Rachel's ground-level knowledge of hospitality operations proving invaluable in ways the trained security team consistently missed. She flagged inconsistencies in staff scheduling records. She noticed catering deliveries that didn't match the venue's usual vendor patterns. During one tense debrief, reviewing radio communications from the night of the attack, she caught something the entire security team had overlooked. That earpiece frequency, she said, tapping the audio logs spread across the conference table. It doesn't match the rest of your team's channel. I worked headset communications for years at 3 different venues before landing here. Every properly issued unit on a security detail runs the same frequency band. This one's slightly off. The room went quiet. Lorenzo leaned forward, studying the technical readout she'd pointed to. Whose earpiece is that? According to the equipment log, Angela said slowly, checking her own records, that's Paul Ferraro's unit. Silence spread across the room. Paul Ferraro had built Lorenzo's entire security infrastructure over the past 8 years. Hired personally, trusted implicitly, the architect of every protective system currently surrounding Lorenzo's operations. That could be a technical malfunction, Lorenzo said, though his voice carried none of the certainty the words implied. It could be, Rachel said carefully. But a security chief's own equipment running a different frequency than his team, on the exact night an ambush happened inside a room he was responsible for securing, that's not a detail I'd dismiss without checking further. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, something cold and calculating moving behind his controlled expression. We check it further. Quietly. The consequence of Rachel's growing involvement escalated days later. She left a late investigation session and found a car idling too long outside the secured townhouse where Lorenzo had insisted, against her initial objections, that she stay while the danger remained active. She'd fought that arrangement hard when he first proposed it. I have a father who needs weekly visits, she told him. A schedule I'm not willing to abandon because you're worried. I'm not asking you to abandon your father, Lorenzo had said. I'm asking you to let me arrange secure transportation for those visits, and to stay somewhere protected the rest of the time. I don't want to be treated like I'm fragile. You're not fragile, Lorenzo had said. You're a witness someone very dangerous wants silenced. Those are different things entirely. She'd negotiated hard, securing terms that let her keep her father's visits, her own input on her schedule, a refusal to be fully absorbed into Lorenzo's controlled world. And those terms had held mostly until the idling car outside made the abstract danger suddenly viscerally real. She called Lorenzo immediately, adrenaline cutting through her attempted composure. There's a car outside. It's been sitting there for 20 minutes. Lorenzo's response was instant, sharp with alarm. Don't go near the windows. I'm sending additional security now. This is escalating, Rachel said, fear finally cracking through her careful control. Every day this drags on, it gets more dangerous, not less. I know, Lorenzo said, and the genuine regret in his voice was unmistakable. We're close to confirming Paul's involvement. Once we do, this ends. Rachel stood at the edge of the window, careful to stay out of sight, watching the idling car finally pull away into traffic. It needs to end soon, she said. I can't keep living like this. I know, Lorenzo said again, quieter this time. I'm sorry this cost you as much as it already has. Whatever careful distance either of them had maintained through the investigation's early days had, Rachel understood, already begun dissolving into something neither of them had fully named yet. The secured townhouse where Rachel now stayed under Lorenzo's protection had, over the following days, become less a temporary safe house and more a shared, complicated space neither of them fully acknowledged out loud. Scene 1 came on a quiet morning, practical and immediate. Rachel found Lorenzo in the kitchen before dawn, reviewing Paul Ferraro's personnel file with the exhausted focus of a man who hadn't slept properly in days. You've been at this all night, she said, setting coffee beside him without being asked. 8 years, Lorenzo said. I trusted him with my life, my family's safety, every protective decision this operation has made for nearly a decade. I keep going through his file looking for something I should have caught sooner. Hindsight makes everything look obvious, Rachel said, settling into the chair across from him. You couldn't have known he'd turn. Couldn't I? Something bitter crossed Lorenzo's face. I lost a cousin years ago in an ambush that happened almost exactly this way. Trusted security, a breach nobody caught until it was too late. I told myself afterward I'd never let that happen again. And here I am, apparently letting exactly that happen again right under my own roof. Scene 2 arrived 3 days later, an argument sharper than either expected. Lorenzo announced, over a tense dinner, that he wanted to cancel Rachel's scheduled visit to her father entirely until Paul's involvement was confirmed and neutralized. Absolutely not, Rachel said immediately. We negotiated this. My father's visits are non-negotiable. You don't get to change the terms every time you get nervous. Rachel, if Paul realizes how close we are to exposing him and he knows about your father, then we increase security around that visit specifically, but you don't get to cancel it, she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. My mother's illness got missed for months because everyone around her hesitated, waited for certainty before acting. I am not going to let fear make me abandon the one person left in my life who actually needs me every week. Lorenzo sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time actually paused instead of immediately defending his position. You're right, he said finally. Tell me what would actually work instead. Rachel's anger softened at the honesty. Increase security for the visit. Don't cancel it. Let me decide how to handle the real risk, not just your fear of a hypothetical one. Done, Lorenzo said, meaning it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Rachel found him alone on the townhouse's small back patio, a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. My cousin Marco, Lorenzo said before she'd even asked what was wrong. 6 years ago. He was ambushed at a meeting I'd assured him was secure. I trusted the wrong information and he paid for it. I've spent every year since building tighter and tighter security around myself and everyone close to me, telling myself that enough control would prevent it from ever happening again. His voice went quiet. And now I find out the man I trusted most to build that security might have been the exact vulnerability I never checked closely enough. I don't know how to reconcile that. Rachel sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. That's not a failure of vigilance, Lorenzo. That's just how betrayal works. You can build every wall imaginable, and it still comes down to trusting specific people with specific access. No amount of control fully eliminates that risk. You keep saying things like that, Lorenzo said, looking at her with something raw and unguarded. Like you actually understand exactly what it costs to carry that kind of guilt. I do, Rachel said quietly. I watched my mother's symptoms get dismissed for months because everyone around her, doctors, family, even me sometimes, waited for more certainty before acting. She died because too many people hesitated. I've spent years since then refusing to make that same mistake again in every part of my life. That's not the same as your guilt over Marco, but it's close enough that I understand the shape of it. He looked at her, something shifting, fully open in his expression. You keep finding the exact thing I need to hear without me ever asking for it directly. I've had a lot of practice reading what people actually need, Rachel said. It's the same skill that got those two men caught at the gala. Noticing what's underneath the surface. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the city lights spreading beyond the patio, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably present. Two people who'd both learned, through different losses, exactly how much courage it took to trust an instinct nobody else could fully verify. It was Angela who broke the moment, appearing at the patio door, tablet in hand, expression tight. Lorenzo, she said. I finally confirmed it. Paul's earpiece frequency wasn't a malfunction. He switched to a private channel 3 minutes before the shooting started, coordinating with someone outside our system entirely. Lorenzo's posture went rigid. That confirms it completely. It confirms motive and opportunity, Angela said. It doesn't confirm he'll go quietly. Paul built this entire security apparatus himself. He knows every weakness in it better than anyone alive. Rachel felt a cold, sinking realization settle into her chest. The detail she'd noticed almost in passing during a routine debrief, suddenly transforming into the exact piece of evidence someone very dangerous now had every reason to want buried, along with the woman who'd found it. He knows I'm the one who caught the frequency discrepancy, she said slowly. Lorenzo's expression went cold and absolute. Then we finish this before he decides you're too dangerous to leave as a loose end. Whatever fragile calm they'd built over the past week had just shattered completely. Paul Ferraro's plan, once Lorenzo's investigators traced its full scope, revealed a calculated, years-long positioning. A security chief who'd spent nearly a decade building himself into an indispensable, trusted position specifically so that when the moment came to betray it, no one would think to look at him first. He sold access to a rival organization, Angela reported, laying out the financial trail she'd uncovered. Payment routed through an offshore account, timed to coincide with tonight's gala planning. He gave them the ballroom layout, the security schedule, everything they needed to plan the ambush precisely. 8 years of trust, Lorenzo said, voice flat with barely controlled fury. And he sold every piece of it for a payday. And now he knows Rachel identified the frequency discrepancy, Angela said grimly. He's not going to wait around for formal proceedings. The confrontation happened faster than anyone expected. Rachel received a message that afternoon, purportedly from hotel management, requesting she meet a maintenance supervisor in the service corridor to clarify details about the electrical room's breaker system for the ongoing investigation. She almost went alone. Something, instinct, the same wrongness that had saved 500 lives at the gala, made her pause at the corridor entrance instead, checking the message's sender details more carefully. The account didn't match any legitimate hotel management contact she'd worked with throughout the investigation. She called Lorenzo immediately. "Someone's trying to lure me into the service corridor. The message is fake." "Don't go near it," Lorenzo said, already moving. "I'm coming to you now." But Paul, sensing his window closing, had already anticipated resistance. Rachel, backing away from the corridor entrance, found her path suddenly blocked by a man she recognized from Lorenzo's security roster. Not Paul himself, but one of his loyal subordinates, expression carrying the same cornered desperation that came from being asked to protect someone else's betrayal. "Mr. Ferraro just wants to talk," the man said, his voice tight with obvious discomfort at what he'd been asked to do. "Come with me quietly." "I know exactly what happens if I go with you quietly," Rachel said, backing carefully toward the ballroom's main entrance, drawing on every instinct that had kept her alive through a decade of reading dangerous rooms. "You don't actually want to be part of this. I can see it on your face." The man hesitated, genuine conflict visible in his expression. And that hesitation was exactly what Rachel needed. She turned and ran, using her intimate 2-year memory of the hotel's actual layout, cutting through a maintenance corridor she knew connected to the main lobby faster than the route any outsider would expect her to take. Lorenzo found her there minutes later, breathless but unharmed, his own alarm turning instantly to cold, focused fury as she recounted what happened. "Paul's making his move," Lorenzo said. "He knows we're closing in and he's trying to eliminate the witness before formal proceedings make that impossible." "Then we finish this now," Rachel said. "Before he tries again with less warning." Lorenzo's security team traced Paul to the hotel's maintenance level within the hour, cornered in the same network of service corridors he'd once been trusted to secure. Rachel, whose 2 years of memorizing the building's actual bones now proved more valuable than any official blueprint, guided Lorenzo's men through the fastest route, cutting off Paul's most likely escape paths before he could reach them. "You know this building better than the men who built it," Lorenzo said, following her lead through a narrow service passage. "I pay attention," Rachel said. "It's the same thing I've been telling you since the night we met." They found Paul in a maintenance stairwell, cornered and desperate, his earlier composure completely dissolved. "Lorenzo," Paul said, hands raised, voice cracking. "This isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Lorenzo said, voice absolutely lethal. 8 years of trust, and you sold every piece of my family's security to the people who tried to kill me. Then you tried to have Rachel silenced when she caught what you'd done. They offered more than you were ever going to pay me," Paul said, desperation cracking his composure completely. 8 years, Lorenzo, and I was still just an employee to you. Never family. Never really trusted the way your actual blood is trusted. You were trusted with everything that mattered, Lorenzo said. You just decided resentment mattered more than that trust. Lorenzo's men closed in, restraining Paul before he could attempt anything further. In the sudden, tense quiet afterward, Lorenzo turned to Rachel, something raw and grateful moving across his controlled expression. "You didn't have to help track him down personally," he said. "You could have stayed back, let my men handle this." "I could have," Rachel agreed. "But I've spent this entire investigation proving my instincts were worth trusting. I wasn't going to stop now, right when it actually mattered most." Paul's capture should have ended the danger cleanly, but the full reckoning of what his betrayal had cost, and what addressing it honestly would require, became clear only in the days that followed, as Lorenzo faced a decision considerably harder than simply handing Paul over to authorities. "He built our entire security infrastructure," Marco explained, Lorenzo's remaining senior advisor, gray-haired and steeped in institutional memory. "Every protocol, every system, every layer of protection this family currently relies on runs through architecture Paul personally designed. If you tear all of it down because one man betrayed you, you leave this entire operation exposed while you rebuild from nothing." "And if I keep using infrastructure a traitor built?" Lorenzo asked. "How do I trust any of it, knowing he had 8 years to embed vulnerabilities I haven't found yet? You audit it carefully. Systematically. You don't have to abandon everything overnight. Lorenzo was quiet a long moment, studying the security architecture diagrams spread across his desk. I can't run this family's protection on a foundation I no longer trust, he said finally. Even if auditing it carefully would be less disruptive. Rachel almost died in a service corridor because I trusted a system built by a man who'd already decided to betray it. I'm not interested in patching that trust. I'm interested in starting over, honestly, even if it costs us years of established protection infrastructure to do it. That's an enormous sacrifice, Marco warned. Rebuilding an entire security apparatus from scratch, during a period when you're already vulnerable from this exact breach. That's exactly the moment rivals will look to exploit. Then we accept that risk, Lorenzo said. I'd rather be vulnerable honestly than protected by something I can no longer trust. It was, Rachel would understand later, the single most costly decision Lorenzo made throughout the entire investigation. Not the confrontation with Paul directly, but the deliberate dismantling of the security infrastructure Paul had spent 8 years building, done specifically to ensure the family's protection could never again be quietly compromised by a single trusted architect. He turned Paul over to face consequences within the family's own internal justice system, Rachel's testimony about the earpiece frequency discrepancy forming the cornerstone evidence that sealed the betrayal beyond any doubt. The financial trail Angela had uncovered, combined with Rachel's precise, detailed account of the fake message meant to lure her into the corridor, left no room for Paul's earlier resentment to be spun into anything resembling justification. The rebuilding began immediately, painstaking and exhausting, Lorenzo personally overseeing every new protocol, every new hire, refusing to delegate the kind of unchecked trust that had let Paul's betrayal flourish unnoticed for years. You lost years of established infrastructure for this, Rachel told him, finding him alone in his office one evening, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. I'd lose it again, Lorenzo said simply. Without hesitation. Why? Rachel asked, needing to understand fully. You could have audited the existing systems carefully, kept most of what Paul built, saved yourself years of vulnerability during the rebuild. For years I told myself that enough control, enough carefully built infrastructure, could prevent the kind of loss I experienced with my cousin Marco, Lorenzo said. Watching you nearly get killed in that corridor because I trusted a system built by someone who'd already decided to betray it. That showed me exactly how hollow that control actually was. I can't keep building on a foundation I no longer believe in, even if tearing it down costs me everything Paul built over 8 years. You taught me that without ever meaning to. He met her eyes directly. Trusting your own instincts even when they contradict established systems everyone else believes in. That's not weakness. That's the only thing that actually caught what years of careful infrastructure completely missed. Rachel was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd admitted against the fierce independence she'd fought to protect throughout this entire ordeal. I need you to understand something too, she said finally. I'm not interested in staying close to you because I feel like I owe you anything for protecting me, or because you made a costly, principled decision about your security systems. I've spent my whole life trusting my own instincts and rarely getting believed for it. I won't accept comfortable gratitude as a replacement for something genuinely equal, not even from you. That's exactly what I want you to understand too, Lorenzo said. Whatever you choose next, it has to be entirely yours. The formal resolution came 2 weeks later. Paul's fate settled within channels neither Rachel nor Lorenzo discussed in detail, the immediate threat to her life finally, permanently neutralized. It's over, Lorenzo told her, finding her at her father's apartment during one of her weekly visits, the man himself dozing peacefully in his armchair nearby. Paul's no longer a threat to you or to anyone. How does that feel? Rachel asked quietly, mindful of her father's rest. Lighter than I expected, Lorenzo admitted. I spent years believing that enough careful control could prevent every possible betrayal. Watching you trust your own instincts even when explaining them felt impossible, even when it meant confronting a threat I'd have preferred to handle without you anywhere near it. I think I finally understand what actually matters more than control. What's that? Building something honest enough that it doesn't need perfect control to survive, Lorenzo said. Trusting the people close to you enough to let their instincts matter, even when those instincts contradict everything your carefully built systems assumed. Rachel looked at him. a powerful, complicated man who had torn down years of established protection rather than let a single traitor's architecture continue defining his family's safety, and felt something in her own careful, hypervigilant life finally fully settle. "I'm not disappearing back into my old life completely," she said. "But I'm also not becoming someone who exists only inside yours. I want both, built slowly on my own terms." "Those are good terms," Lorenzo said. "I'll hold to them." 1 month later, Rachel still worked events at the Marriott Grand, the ballroom fully restored, though she still felt a small, private tightness crossing the exact spot where Gunfire had once torn through the darkness she'd created. Lorenzo had offered her, more than once, a life of complete comfort and permanent security, full financial independence, an end to service industry work entirely, protection that would never again require her to clock in for an ordinary shift. She turned it down every time, gently but firmly, exactly as she'd promised herself she would. "You could stop working completely," Lorenzo said one evening, finding her reviewing next week's event schedule at her kitchen table. "You've more than earned that." "I know," Rachel said. "But this work is mine. Built by me over a decade without anyone handing it to me. I'm not interested in trading that away just because an easier option exists now." "Then what do you want instead?" "I want you to stop offering me an easier version of my life like there's a version of my answer where I eventually say yes," Rachel said, though her tone carried more warmth than irritation. "I want my independence. I want you beside me, not managing my choices for me." "Those aren't negotiable terms, Lorenzo. They're just who I am." "I know," Lorenzo said, something soft moving behind his careful expression. "I keep offering because some part of me still worries that not offering means I'm not doing enough. I'm working on that." She reached into her apron pocket where she still carried her small notepad on every shift, the pages filled now with 2 years of small operational details nobody else bothered tracking. "I almost stopped carrying this," she said, "after everything it ended up meaning. I thought about retiring it, keeping it as some kind of memento instead." "Why didn't you?" "Because I think it's supposed to keep doing exactly what it's always done," Rachel said. "Tracking small, unglamorous details nobody thinks matter until suddenly one of them does. That's not really about the notepad. That's about trusting the instinct behind it, even when nobody else has confirmed it's worth trusting yet." Lorenzo took her hand gently, the gesture entirely hers to accept or decline. "I know I complicated your independence pulling you into all of this danger," he said. "I've thought about that a lot. Whether protecting you actually helped or whether it just handed you a different, more dangerous version of the same problem." "It did complicate things," Rachel admitted honestly. "But you also listened every single time I pushed back. That's the difference. You didn't just decide for me and expect gratitude. You let me set the terms even when it clearly would have been easier for you not to." "Then let's keep building it that way," Lorenzo said, "together on whatever terms actually work for both of us." She closed the distance between them herself, deliberate and certain, and kissed him. The choice entirely hers, made with eyes open to exactly what it had cost and exactly what it had given her in return. Rachel still tucks that same worn notepad into her apron every single shift, still trusts the quiet, unglamorous instinct that once told her something was wrong before anyone else in that ballroom noticed. She still believes, more firmly now than ever, that the bravest thing a person can do sometimes has nothing to do with certainty at all. Just the willingness to act on what you see even when no one else sees it yet. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Rachel right to act alone on instinct in that critical moment, or should she have found a way to warn someone first, even if it meant losing precious seconds? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. If stories about quiet instinct proving braver than certainty resonate with you, subscribe. The next one is coming soon.